So as Theo said, my name is Dr. Sadie Teal, and just call me Sadie. And I'm a parishioner of Blessed Sacrament, and Lumen is very close to my heart. I met my now husband through Lumen and Blessed Sacrament softball team really far back ago that I don't want to mention how long ago, but it's definitely been something that me and my husband are still very much a part of this community and really like that it's still thriving and the Persadi group is still doing really well. As Theo mentioned, so I'm a psychologist and I do therapy with adults, specifically around anxiety, depression, and trauma. And I also teach at Seattle U. I teach some intro classes of psychology and intro counseling. So I'm a pretty big psych nerd. I really like talking about psychology. I get really into the details sometimes of the research, so I'm going to try to hold back as much as I can, but if you have more questions, I'll try to answer as best as I can. Also, as Theo mentioned, from Minnesota, that's also an area if you want me to keep talking for a really long time. I can talk about that a lot. But anyway, so talking about seasonal depression, also known as seasonal affective disorder, and what is it? What does it look like? How does it often get treated? And then how do we even integrate that within Catholicism, not just at the mental health level, but getting into even some specifics with seasonal depression as well as just general depression. So what is it, first of all? Waking up. There we go. Okay. So seasonal depression, clinically, is this regular relationship between mood episodes and specific seasons over at least 2-year period, meaning you have experiences of more depressive symptoms during usually between winter and spring, and they usually go away between summer and fall, and then they come back. And so there's this cyclical pattern with the seasons. And so it is a type of depression, meaning it has the symptoms of depressed mood and sometimes what's called anhedonia, or this lack of pleasure in things that usually you like to do. But additionally, with seasonal depression, has 4 specific symptoms. One is hypersomnia, which means you feel very, very tired a lot of the time. You want to sleep more, you want to stay in bed more. You have increased appetite, specifically around carb cravings, and there's generally fatigue, so even that just physical exhaustion. And so oftentimes when I talk about seasonal depression, I talk about the symptoms. What always comes to my mind is like a bear hibernating, like you just want carb load, you just want to sleep, you just want to like lay low for winter until it gets nice enough. And a lot of this is actually due to some pieces that are due to the actual season. So causes of seasonal depression, there's not one piece, there's actually a dual hypothesis where it's both. You might have to do that, we'll see. Both physiological vulnerabilities and psychological vulnerabilities. So physiological meaning biological, that you're going to have physical responses to the reduced amount of sunlight. There's going to be a decrease in serotonin, and there's going to be an increase in melatonin due to the shorter amount of day that is lit by the sun. That actually has this hormonal shift in the body. However, even though that is happening for all people, it's not affecting everybody the exact same way. And so somebody can have some physiological vulnerabilities to that, where they're affected by those changes more than other people. And then the psychological vulnerabilities are more about that tendency to interpret those physiological changes or those physical changes as negative about yourself. I shouldn't feel this way. Why can't I just get out of bed? Something's wrong with me. Other people are able to do this. Why can't I? And this rumination of this must mean something's wrong. This then gets into more of the psychological symptoms of depressed mood, negative cognition, that sense of hopelessness, and fear that it might not change. Okay? Any questions about those? Clarifications?
Okay, so
Yeah.
there's like 4 symptoms, like how do you tell versus people who are just feeling tired, other reasons, and really like severe from people with seasonal depression?
Yeah, so the big thing around diagnostics in general for mental health is it has to meet 2 thresholds. One, it is distressing for most of the time, and it is causing impact in your day-to-day function. So yeah, we might have days where you're feeling more tired, more lethargic, but it might not technically meet threshold of seasonal depression if 1, you're also not having those other symptoms. 2, it doesn't last for more than like 3 days. If it needs to last at least about a week to be considered seasonal depression, and this recognition that it's having this bigger impact on you, right? And so it's seen as not this, yes you have it or no you don't, it's more of this threshold of how much are you subclinical or clinical levels of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Okay. So what the recommended treatments are around seasonal depression tend to be 1, medication. Because the serotonin levels get shifted down, oftentimes, especially primary care providers are going to offer SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Because the theory of that is it's going to make the serotonin stay around a little bit longer. So that decrease that you have due to the season is going to be helped with the medication. That can also be helped with SNRIs, which are selective norepinephrine, I can always never say that word, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, which also has an impact on serotonin. Phototherapy, which is not taking pictures all the time. Phototherapy is light therapy, putting yourself in front of light. And the one that oftentimes is thought about is just being outside, which does count, but it actually could be putting yourself in front of a really bright fluorescent light. It's recommended that this happens morning versus evening, and that it's about 30 minutes at a time, and that it's at a certain luminosity as well. So the luminosity of 10,000 lux of full spectrum, cool, white fluorescent lights. What that has shown is that because of that melatonin being so high, our melatonin is so high during this time often because our circadian rhythm is being impacted by the lack of light. So if we trick your brain into being hit with light a little bit more, it helps offset that melatonin level a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Isn't sunlight a more warm balance of colors relative to a cool balance? So why are they recommending cool lights?
They're recommending cool light because it has enough brightness to it. So yes, the sunlight directly is first. However, because of where it is in the season, the distance where the light is going to be hitting us is still farther. And so even though, yes, it was sunny today, the sun is not having as much of a direct impact on us as it does in the summertime because it's closer to us in terms of geography. Because of this, people who are at higher, who are at more, not higher latitudes. Higher latitudes? I'm now getting it flipped.
Well, higher latitudes means more extreme at distance and more atmosphere.
Right, because so people who are further away from the equator basically tend to be affected by seasonal depression a lot more, rather being affected by those differences in shortness and length of light in the day. Another form is psychotherapy, specifically CBT, which is short for cognitive behavioral therapy, and ACT, it doesn't actually, you don't spell it out, it's ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. These are speaking to the psychological symptoms and the psychological hypothesis part of it, because it's attending to how you're thinking about what's happening. It's not going to necessarily change the fact that there isn't a lot of light outside, it's going to change how you think about what this means for you and what this means long term. Okay? And we're going to get more into that later, but I wanted to give an overview of kind of what is expected. And lastly is lifestyle changes, and that's just behavioral changes, things that you can do to help mitigate some of these effects, to help raise serotonin in different ways, to help monitor your melatonin in different ways, things like that. So things like sleep hygiene, so making sure you're still getting the same amount of sleep now, even if you feel more tired, still trying to stick to a routine. Especially oftentimes this want of like, okay, I'll, not get a lot of sleep during the week, and then I'll make up for it on the weekends. Our brain, our body does not actually respond to that. You build up sleep debt, it throws off your circadian rhythm more, it throws off your melatonin, and it actually helps, it doesn't help set it into more of a balance. And so during the seasons of winter and spring, especially if you feel more impacted by that lack of light, you're going to want to be very diligent about prioritizing sleep maintenance in general. Okay, so that was overview, psychology side, clinical side. Now I want to get into generally how can we integrate mental health with faith? And I want this to be a question around what are your thoughts, or maybe things, messages you've heard in the church, from people who are very faithful, who have taught you the faith, from your families, about what mental health means in Catholicism. Anybody have any pushback? And it can be something that you don't agree with, but you've heard. Yeah.
Someone who's connected to other people, part of the community.
Mm-hmm. So, can you say more about that?
Well, it's like we're the body of Christ, so the idea that all the parts should be connected, communicating with each other, and helping each other in a growing way. Okay, so that fact that we have community will help with mental health? Yeah, and a healthy person is going to be part of the community.
Okay, got it. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, that like faith and mental health is almost like an inverse relationship. Is that like if your faith is really strong, your mental health should be really good?
Yeah.
Maybe it's like more farther.
Yeah, this idea that if you had a good faith life, your mental health will flourish.
Yeah.
And therefore the opposite kind of gets put in the brain of if your mental health is not doing well, that might mean your faith life is not doing well. Is that kind of sometimes the message?
Like kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It could be hard if I notice that I'm depressed and my output is low or general activity level is low. It can be hard to feel like I'm living in accordance with the values and contributing.
Yeah.
And, for people around me and the community, and really, trying to turn that into like a shame spiral, and but maybe that's a connection that stems up to the values and linking to overall output and how that's affected by depression. Yeah.
So that idea that you're in a more depressed state or just even more lower energy, that means you can't interact as much or do as much like you might want to do or really believe in doing. And then that feeling of I should be doing more, I should be doing this, why can't I just figure it out, getting into some shame. Yeah, you have one?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we said define mental health and faith, right? So
Yeah.
Is there such thing, as you mentioned, as graph, if one goes better, but how do you, I understand how you define health, like mental health, but how do you define faith?
Right. Yeah.
So that's my question, like just because you go to church and for adoration and you go to all these healing retreats, all that stuff, and then you treat your neighbor, your neighbors like church. I mean, is that faith health?
Right, I would agree with that. That idea of even trying to measure being healthy in my faith, that's gonna be, there's not this, okay, here's the goal, oh, I met it, I'm done. I'm faithful forever. This is how it works. But there's this ongoing relationship that it's about not only how you're interacting with the faith, but even how you are able to kind of grapple with the times that you might feel doubt, or those times where you're feeling confused, or those times where you're feeling really angry with someone. And all of those pieces are a part of you as well. It's not just, oh, on Sunday I go to church, that's my faith life, and then outside of that is my mental health life, or my work life, or something like that. Yeah.
Kind of similar, but also I think maybe the reverse.
Okay.
So I'm in therapy right now, and my therapist has mentioned several times to me that like if my faith life and just being involved in the Catholic Church is something that brings me joy, that makes me feel good, it's something that I should continue doing. And so it's like, it was nice to have that affirmation from somebody who is, like, she is not of faith.
Sure.
And so just having that affirmation of like, this is something that gives meaning into my life, this is something that makes me a fuller person, was really nice to hear.
Yeah, so even getting some messages from possibly secular therapists of saying, this is a good because it might be giving you community, because it might be giving you that joy. And so not wanting to take it away or pathologize it, but rather saying, yeah, keep doing that. That's a good thing for you generally. Yeah.
I think one of the difficulties with having an active faith life and monitoring one's own mental health is the association between our spiritual life as being one of consolation or joy, and then taking that as the calibration of how our faith life is doing when we hit periods of spiritual dryness and desolation, and then associating that with meaning about our faith, meaning about our mental health, instead of maybe perhaps separating that, or maybe being a little bit more nuanced on how we take apart what is non-spiritual desolation and what is spiritual desolation, what those different things feel like.
Yeah. So kind of adding to that, I really liked how you put that, because I think that can fall into both how we think about faith life or spirituality as well as mental health. We see it as, I have to be happy, I have to be joyful, I have to be peaceful all the time. And if I'm not, something's wrong. When for both of them, there are going to be these fluctuations, and that's actually part of it, not showing that something's necessarily absolutely wrong. What oftentimes gets to the point where it's feeling like, okay, we might need to attend to it more, is when it is longer term, if we're feeling lost in it, or we're getting into that, what does this mean, where it gets more into that psychological, we're getting negative thoughts about what this might mean, that this is how it's going to be forever, and we get really hopeless in either faith or in our mental health. And so oftentimes when I talk about integration of mental health and faith, I see that there's a lot of parallels, and because of that, there needs to be a lot of integration of recognizing they are not going to be, okay, you have to figure out your mental health, and then you can be a faithful Catholic. Or, first figure out how to be a faithful Catholic, and then figure out your mental health. It's always going to be both and. It's always going to be something that's going to be happening simultaneously, because they're always going to be fluctuating somewhat, right? So, with that, I want to give a little bit of a quote about mental health in the Christian tradition. So John Paul II wrote, "Christ took all suffering on himself, even mental illness. Whoever suffers from mental illness always bears God's image and likeness in himself, as does every human being. In addition, he always has the inalienable right not only to be considered as an image of God, and therefore a person, but also to be treated as such." So this really was as a speaking of, this should be people with mental illness, mental health concerns should be isolated until they're better, and then they can come back to the community. But more as, this is part of our community, this is part of our humanity, that suffering is part of who we are as God's children. And it's not that we're supposed to do it alone. Yeah.
What if that person puts their life or other people's life in danger?
Yeah, so when it gets into this more extreme mode, where it's really dangerous or kind of almost to the point where there's possible harm, that's where there needs to be recognition of how do we keep people safe. With the understanding of, we're still seeing them as a person. We're going to keep them safe, and everyone's safe for everyone's good. We believe that because they're a person, we want them to be safe because they're a child of God, right? So we're going to keep them safe as best we can, and they might not be able to do that for themselves, right? And so there's always going to be limits of, yeah, we have to make sure that everybody has safety and that recognition of taking care of this secure space, and not demonizing if there's a sense of, well, something's wrong with you, so you just have to figure this out by yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. So I always like to also point out, especially with this idea of Christ's image, can anybody think of a time in the Gospels where Jesus had emotions, big emotions? Yeah.
You flip the table.
He flipped the table! That's right, that's my favorite one! Jesus got so angry that he flipped the tables in the temple. Any other times? Yeah.
When Lazarus died.
When Lazarus died, he wept. He wept. He was so sad. He was so much in grief.
He rejoiced in the spirit when the disciples came back after casting out demons.
Yeah. Rejoicing, that happiness, that excitement.
The agony in the garden, he's like, he knows he's going to suffer, and he's like, oh man, like I do not want to do this, but...
The agony in the garden, so other than, flipping tables is my favorite, just because I love the image of Jesus flipping tables. But the agony in the garden, I think, speaks to such the human experience of, oh, I don't want to do this. There's this thing, this suffering that I know is here, and I don't want to do it. Can you please make it not happen? And then there's that part of it that's the divinity of him saying, but it's your will. I will do what I need to do. But that doubt, that questioning speaks so much to how our heads get so stuck when we're faced with suffering, right? And I think I take consolation with this sense of, okay, that's normal. It's okay to not want to suffer. Because even Jesus didn't want to. He didn't just say, yep, I know what's going to happen, and it's going to be awful, but I'm here and I'm going to be fine. That's okay. And I think that idea of what those stories tell us and remind us that emotions are a natural part of our humanity. And they recognize that they tell us things and allow us to have that vulnerability as well, right? And so recognizing that at the state of, we don't need to judge our own emotions. We don't need to judge these pieces as negative, awful things of us not being good enough or not doing well enough or trying hard enough. If I just thought better, I could figure it out. Letting there be some acceptance, and these emotions are here, and maybe I really don't like them. And that's okay too. Okay? So, how addressing seasonal depression physiologically or behaviorally, the Catholic perspective, versus light therapy. I say Catholic perspective, but it's the world. You can go out and see the light God gave us sunlight. This is great. Using options to get outside as much as you can. Today was a great opportunity. Hopefully, raise your hands. Anybody get outside while it's sunny today? Yeah? Even like 2 minutes? Great. That's awesome. Being close to a window when it was sunny? Yeah? That counts too. Having moments where you just take a second to take care of yourself, to recognize what you might need in that moment, that's an important thing. Connection to others. This is why I think mental health and faith life, especially in Catholicism, is so interconnected, because Catholic Church is a community. In itself, in the Trinity itself, we understand that we are relational. We need relationships. We need connections. And that has been shown in science over and over. It's been shown, hey, it wasn't just God just making this up. This is something that is good for us. And it can help with serotonin levels. It can help with just that reminder that you're not alone, that you can be suffering, and it's okay. you're going to be okay. Physical activity, getting moving, allowing for this sense of I can be able to go for a walk, or even just I have a little bit of a break. I'm going to walk up and down the stairs a little bit. Letting there be some movement is a necessary part for our mental health, because we can't just think our way through everything necessarily. Sometimes we just need to help our body get a little bit of something extra, okay? Sleep hygiene. Like I said before, managing your sleep, letting that be a priority, taking care of yourself in that way is something that can help in general. The idea of oftentimes, especially with faith life, is the idea of sometimes I can get people to do this because it's like, well, if you aren't feeling your best, you can't give your best. If you want to be a servant of God, you have to be able to make sure that you are around to be a servant of God. Sleep is a very big part of that. And then, if necessary, that medication management is an option. That idea of seeking treatment is in line with Catholicism. There's an idea that science and faith are compatible, and therefore what we find out with science sometimes is a helpful thing for helping us in our moments. Okay? So, now getting into addressing it psychologically. And I want to introduce this idea of Catholic acceptance commitment therapy. So acceptance and commitment therapy is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy that focuses on these two parts, acceptance and commitment or change. So I do some acceptance commitment therapy, and I was like, yeah, I feel like this would be a really good resource for seasonal depression with faith life and things like that. And then I was doing a little bit of research to make sure I was saying things right, and then I found someone has a dissertation about Catholic acceptance commitment therapy. So, got a lot of help with that, of the idea of, oh yeah, this is how it could be laid out. These are the options that it could look like. And so, wanting to lay out what this can look like. First part, acceptance. Which, in this part, it doesn't mean you just have to deal with it. You just have to, don't complain, don't talk about it, just take it in. No, this is more about how are you holding, embracing, and even saying yes to the entirety of your life experience. Especially with seasonal depression, this is an important piece because it lets you get into that bigger picture of maybe this is just one season of my life. That this doesn't have to be my whole life. That this is one part, one fluctuation, and how do I embrace that, say yes to it. Relational acceptance is not just acceptance on my own, but actually acceptance towards God, towards others, recognizing where I'm at, where other people are at, and embracing that. Not seeing it as an issue or a vulnerability that needs to be addressed separately, but doing it in community. Synonymous with concepts of trust, surrender, and submission to God's will. And building more flexible psychological stance to life. So it's letting there be, instead of, this is, I guess, how it always is going to be, and I just have to shut up and be okay with it. It's, okay, this is where I'm at right now. Don't like it. Maybe it's really, really hard. And this is where I'm at right now. Okay? So having some more flexibility. Now, I want to also be very clear when I talk about acceptance. Because when I talk about acceptance, I am not talking about accepting abuse, accepting harm, accepting things that are not good for the soul, right? Those are not the types of situations that I'm asking you, just embrace that. Those are the types of situations where, no, we need to talk about how to keep you safe, how to keep you okay. With acceptance commitment therapy, there's this mantra or this understanding that comes from Carl Rogers that acceptance, when I accept myself as I am, then I change. As in, I can't change until I first am made aware of and allow for what's happening in the now. And this connects so well, I think, to our faith because it gives us that idea of freedom of choice, that free will of we're not being forced to do this because this is part of the rules. We are free to choose to make these changes, to recognize what's happening and try to do something that will help us or help other people, right? So the flip side of it is we've actually seen that trying to avoid suffering tends to lend to more suffering. There's a whole piece that avoidance of negative emotions, avoidance of anxiety, avoidance of trauma tends to make it worse. Because your brain is saying, okay, this is really scary, I really don't like this, let's go away from it. And immediately we're like, oh, phew, we're away from it, I feel so much better. But long term, our brain got the message, oh, that wasn't just uncomfortable or scary, that was dangerous. Cannot approach that no matter what. And so then the next time something like that happens again, your brain starts firing off, ooh, this is dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. And when I say dangerous, your nervous system is going off like there is a bear in front of you. And so you avoid it again. And then it builds up and reinforces it over and over again. So that recognition of acceptance of, okay, I really don't like this, this makes me really feel uncomfortable, or I feel really vulnerable right now. But letting it be there can actually help with making a change. And then that leads into the commitment, the actual change. This you can think about as working towards virtue. You're working towards your own good and the good of others. You're trying to make this change in thoughts, you're trying to make a change in behaviors, and to act in accordance with your own personal and faith values. With this piece of this, it also means that change cannot happen without first having that awareness and acceptance. You can't just say, I don't like this about myself, so I'm going to force myself to do everything I can. I shouldn't feel like this. Because every time you say, I shouldn't feel like this, what actually shows up is more stress. Every time we tell ourselves, you shouldn't feel this way, there's no reason for this, actually raises your stress levels. It makes it harder to accept, it makes it harder to approach. So the sense of, okay, I don't like that I'm feeling this, but it's here. So what can I do next? Okay. So this is the concept for kind of the theory with acceptance commitment therapy, yeah.
So is there more to acceptance than just having that conversation with yourself?
Yes. So, I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to go over some specific skills that get into what's in the acceptance column and what's in the commitment column. So, there's 5 main skills that get taught with ACT and with Catholic ACT. Cognitive fusion, which is basically how do you let those negative thoughts be a little bit distanced from yourself, not personalize them, not take them in as shame, not take them in as this is something that obviously is true, but maybe more just a thought or an emotion that is here, but it might not be true. Contact with the present moment, another word for this is mindfulness, the sense of how do I stay present in this time? Because oftentimes, especially with depression, we get very stuck in past or future. It's either, it feels like this has lasted forever, or it's, how long is this going to last? This is going to be how it is forever. This is how it's going to impact this, or this, what if, right? So it's how do we bring it back to just the present moment. Self and perspective is this recognition of how do you take yourself and recognize yourself in context with the broader picture. With Catholicism, with Catholic ACT, it's about how do you take that into consideration with possibly the community, possibly with God's plan, with your vocation, bigger picture. It's more than just this individual thing, right? Values identification, and then committed action. How are you taking those steps to make those changes? You can see there's a lot. Those first 4 are all in acceptance. All working towards building your awareness and acceptance or embracing of what's going on. with the last one, the committed action being, okay, let's take steps of what then needs to change. Now that you know all of these things, you've looked at all these pieces, well, what do you think would make most sense for change? So we're going to go over a couple brief techniques. One is called leaves in the stream. Has anybody ever heard of this before? Yeah? Okay, a couple people? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to put a little twist on it that is part of more of the Catholic part of it. So in leaves in the stream, it's a type of almost meditation. The point of it is to let your thoughts, imagine them being like leaves in the stream. The thought is here, instead of holding on to it, trying to figure out why am I having this thought? What does this thought mean? Is this actually going to happen? It's, oh, there's this thought. I'm going to put it in the stream and let it go by. I'm not going to push it go by. I'm not going to watch it and make sure that it does turn the corner. I'm just going to let it go by in a slow stream. The Catholic extra piece to this is you can imagine and visualize some person, a spiritual figure, Jesus, God, a saint, maybe your spiritual doctor, being there with you and either holding your hand or letting it go into a basket that they're holding and saying, I'll take care of this. This sense of you don't have to be alone in this, but this person is there to help, that Jesus or God is there to really help make sure that you know you're not alone in this. They'll take care of it. They'll hold on to it. You don't have to worry about it as much. Okay. So that's one where it's just this sense of, okay, having this thought, I'm just going to try to say, hey, having this thought. I'm going to imagine putting it in a stream and letting it go by. If you have an issue with streams, I've also heard people use clouds. Say, okay, it's a cloud, I'm going to slowly watch it go by the sky. Okay? Another one is checking in on your evaluations and judgments. This means, are your thoughts and emotions quickly being judged as good, bad, this must mean this must mean that? Or are you having some objective, just, this is what it is? So, an example of an evaluation and judgment is, I shouldn't feel so sad. I have nothing to be sad about. That's a judgment, that's evaluation. Versus, I'm feeling really sad. I don't like it, but it's here. That's more of an observation. It's not necessarily giving a judgment evaluation. It's recognizing how you might be relating to it. I wish I wasn't feeling sad. But it's not letting it be that this means good or bad things about you. Okay. So letting there be this check-in of, okay, I just had this thought. What is that a judgment? How can I rephrase it so that it's just an observation? And another way to do that is what I call the 3 N's. This is oftentimes more with emotions. The 3 N's are notice, name, and normalize. So what I mean by that is notice what is actually happening physically. Okay, I'm feeling tense. Feeling like my shoulders are really tense. I feel like my jaw tensed. I'm just feeling really, I don't know. Name, okay. Yeah, I'm feeling frustrated, I think. I'm feeling really frustrated right now. And I want to point out the naming, you don't actually have to use an emotion name. If you have an emotion name that fits for it, great. Naming it with something that makes sense to you actually is shown to be really helpful. So if you're like, you know what, I feel like my insides are red, that can be naming it. It's letting there be some sort of identification with it so you can better kind of give a little distance. And then normalizing is, and it's okay. Emotions come and go. They can't last forever. By the way, emotions don't last forever, even happiness. But, which is always the like downfall. It's like, oh man. But emotions, by their very nature, fluctuate. They come up, there's a point of a peak, and then they come down. The fastest way to be done with an emotion is through it. The slowest way is by avoiding it. Okay?
So you should always avoid happiness.
Always avoid happiness. Right, now we'll get in here. No, unfortunately. Just don't think about the happiness. Don't think about it. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Weird though. All right. Second part that I want to go over briefly is connecting with the present and self in perspective. So these kind of can go together. Connecting with the present, that mindfulness, this is already a part of a lot of our traditions within our faith, a lot of practices we do. Prayer life is a type of mindfulness. Meditation. I really like, if anybody has read St. Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, she goes over a ton of stuff around meditation and mental prayer. And what I really, really, really love about her work is she goes over again. Don't make your head work so hard because there's this understanding that our head tries to just take over, and it gets into these even thoughts of shame. It's like, okay, I'm supposed to be praying. Oh, what did I have for lunch today? No, I'm supposed to be praying. Gosh, why can't I focus? Has anybody had prayers like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing with if anybody does mindfulness practices or meditation where you're like, I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath. I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath. Oh, I have to go to the store later today before they close at 5. And then, oh wait, breath. Okay, I'm supposed to be talking. Because our brain thinks constantly. And the point of this is not to force your brain to not think, because that's going to be an uphill battle. It's more about letting it just come and go. Leaves on the street. It's okay. Yep, I do remember I had lunch today. That's good. I'm going to go back to this. And so she has 5 general guidelines to kind of follow for mental prayer. Preparation, getting into a good spot where you feel like it's quiet, you feel prepared, you're not thinking about something, you're not having the oven on, you have to go run and get it or something like that. You prepare a little bit of time and space where you can have this time. She recommends having a selection of the material to focus on. This could be a scripture reading, this could be a mystery of the rosary, this could be a painting or a statue, or just the idea of God. This could be adoration, the monstrance. All these people, all these things can be the focus. Just as a point of focus, kind of like your breath, of like, oh, okay, I need to bring my brain back here. Bring it back here. Consideration. So thinking about, hey, let's say you're focusing on a mystery of the rosary. Consider what happens in that story. Kind of go over the context, make it a little bit of a narrative piece. Who's all involved? What is all happening? And then you can get into that conversation with God. Letting there be this space of talking to God, speaking about what your thoughts are of that focus, or what's going on for you that day, or thanking God for something, or saying, I'm really having a hard time. I don't know why I'm still feeling this way. Saying your doubts to God is extremely powerful because you know what? It is observing. It's recognizing there's not a should or should not. It's saying, I am feeling this, I don't know why, and I want it to go away, but I don't know how. And then that conclusion, her recommendation is ending it with a gratitude piece, this thanking God for having this time, for having this conversation. And this doesn't have to be like an hour long or a half hour long. It could be 10 minutes. It can be a moment where you know, okay, I have this time, and I'm just going to sit in this right here. Okay. And then seeing self in the larger picture speaks to that idea of God's plan for us, for the self, for the world. How are you part of the community? How are you part of this bigger picture? Because there's this both and that sometimes we have a hard time with. God loves me as my individual self. He knows me individually, the number of hairs on my head, everything like that. And I am part of this bigger picture. I am part of this huge plan. And how do I recognize both parts? That I, in myself, in my individuality, am loved, and I am also connected to all these people around me too. Lastly, I wanted to go over a quick kind of breakdown of committing to action. There are 3 steps. Choosing a value, choosing something that you value, choosing something, and it could be also just, you can go off of not even coming up with it yourself. Pick a virtue. Say, okay, this is something I really value. This is something I really want. In this case, it could be, you know what, I'm feeling like I really value my friendships, and I've been feeling really isolated lately. And I feel not as connected, and I know connection is really important to me. So I'm going to focus on that. So then you need to create. What is a goal with that? You can't just say, okay, connection. What does that mean? Realistically, it could be, okay, I want to go spend some more time with my friends. I want to make sure that I have intentional time where we're interacting and having that connection. Which then means you have to identify what are small steps towards that goal. Okay, I want to connect with my friend, which means I need to reach out to my friend. I need to see what their schedule's like, I need to see what my schedule's like. I need to see what's possible, where their energy level is. Maybe they're stressed right now, and that's not going to be possible to have a really deep conversation. Maybe we just go for a walk right now. Those ideas of identifying what are the actual steps involved in that action that you want to take. And making it one thing at a time. You can't say, I'm going to choose all the values, all the virtues. I'm going to work on all of them. Somehow. I don't know. And it will be great, because that is just going to set you up with that sense of, I didn't do it. And then that psychological sense of, I was supposed to do it. And what does that mean? I'm obviously not disciplined enough. I wasn't focusing enough. I wasn't doing it. I just can't do it. Setting up for failure, because our brain loves black and whites. It loves, if I don't do it right once, I failed. I'll never do it right. It's about how do we build up that flexibility. Okay, I'm going to try this here. It didn't work this time. Okay, what's one of my other steps on this list that I can try next instead? Yeah.
My question about this part is, like, when you have somebody that's depressed, or like you already know what I'm gonna ask, like a traumatized nervous system, like, it's like the action can be like a 1,000,000-pound weight.
Yeah.
So like, what does the person like basically force themselves to do it, or like, what do you, how, because obviously this is like the answer, but it's the whole thing of somebody who is depressed is that like normal tasks are like,
Feel so hard.
Awful. Yeah.
And so part of why this is last after the acceptance and embracing is you have gone through this point of recognizing, where am I at right now? What actually can I do right now? And so part of that is through the prayer, through meditation, is an honest look at, okay, what's going on? What do I actually need? And that sense of, I need to choose something that's realistic, and that's going to be somewhat attainable. And knowing that it's not going to feel good. As in, how I oftentimes tell people is, especially with depression, it's like, okay, you need to be able to get out of bed by this time. Like, let's set a goal. What time do you need to be at something? Okay, so this time is what time you need to wake up. Okay, and this is the time you have to get out of bed. So let's talk about what are the obstacles of getting out of bed. And let's talk about problem solving those obstacles a little bit, but then also already building in the sense of, it's gonna feel hard. It's gonna feel super frustrating. And so it's not about, I feel great about this, I feel motivated to do this, because motivation comes after behavior. It's about, how do I tolerate this discomfort? How do I tolerate this feeling as much as I can to do the thing that I said? And it's sometimes the identifying the small steps is asking for help. I have my mom come in to wake me up, or I have my friend call me and ask if I'm woken up, because I hate it and it makes me annoyed when they call me, but it does give me a sense of accountability that I don't have to just rely on myself. So yeah. Okay. So, summary, seasonal depression. It's a combination of physical and psychological causes, and therefore needs to be attended to with both physical and psychological treatment. meaning you need to both be able to address what you're doing, but then also how you're thinking about what's happening too. Mental health treatment is not counter to Catholic faith, but rather another example of the human experience and allows for opportunities for compassion, empathy, connection, humility, and virtue. And I want to give a couple just resources. I have more that are more specific, but in general, I have this book that's really, really, really good if anybody's had it before. It's called No Unlikely Saints. It is actually a Lenten pilgrimage, 6 weeks, where they go over 6 different saints who had mental health conditions and how that recognition was not seen as, and they just suffered in silence, but rather how it impacted their life and the fluctuation of what that meant for their faith life. And I really, really like it because it points to, hey, God doesn't expect you to be 100% mentally healthy all the time in order to be called to holiness. That actually can be part of your holiness. It's not necessarily this, you have to suffer to be holy. It's more nuanced. Another one is, there's a book called The Mindful Catholic by Dr. Gregory Botero. He also runs an Instagram account and other things called the Catholic Psych, does podcasts and things like that, where he really, really integrates a lot of Catholicism and Catholic teaching with specific therapy and specific therapy tools. And then if you're looking for a therapist who is Catholic, there is a Catholic psychotherapy network. And so you can go there, look on the directory, see who's available. Now that it is more common that telehealth is a thing, location-wise might not be as much of an issue. So kind of checking out that resource if you're looking for a therapist who integrates more Catholicism. Otherwise, Psychology Today is also a good directory for finding a therapist in general. Yeah.
I had a question about medication. So I know it typically takes approximately a month when you start seeing results. So in your experience, are mental health professionals or doctors willing to prescribe in advance if you have a history? Or do you really have to wait until you're actually showing symptoms this year?
Right. So oftentimes in my experience it's mixed.
Okay.
As in, there are some who, especially because technically by diagnostic, you've had this happen multiple years in a row. And so then you can prove history-wise, hey, this happens to me every winter for the last 5 years. For some psychologists or psychiatrists and some doctors, they'll be like, cool, let's get preventative with it then. For others, they will say, let's wait and see. Some other things I didn't really mention that are important. In terms of the prevalence of seasonal depression, it's somewhere between, depending on where you are, but in North America, it's between 5 and 10% of the population. And it also has this piece where it has a risk factor for younger people. There are a couple of theories why. One is because the older you get, the more your hormones kind of recognize that how these are changing with the seasons, and it kind of doesn't change as largely during the seasons. The other theory is that with age, you're understanding that this is a seasonal thing. You recognize with your own experience, oh, I know it gets better when spring comes around, so I just gotta wait this out. Or, oh, I know during this time it's bad, I have to do this, and then I'll be better. And so that sense of preventative things become more natural. The other part of it, though, is recognizing that technically people can't be diagnosed with seasonal depression if they have depression and it just gets worse during winter, but still has some symptoms other times of the year. That's not considered seasonal depression. It has, for it to be clinically diagnosed and therefore researched upon and prevalence rates, it has to go fully in remission during summer usually. Yeah.
Guys, so first of all, love this presentation. I guess I have a question, because you were talking so much about, let's say, CBT and ACT as approaches to therapy. There are, I guess, converse with the Catholic faith, would you say that like just mental health treatment in general and like other approaches do have like that similar kind of like connection to the faith? Like for a little over a month now, I've been having a really good experience with narrative therapy.
Yeah. So I would say most types of therapy can be integrated within Catholicism. There are some exceptions, and that's mostly due to possibly the practitioner / people who are very diligent with having it be, no, this is how it's supposed to be, there's no changing it. So as in, for example, psychoanalytic theory tends to, at its core or at its like history, doesn't really integrate Catholicism very well, but I know psychodynamic therapists who've been able to do it, they just can recognize what needs to change about the understanding of the philosophy underpinning it. But yeah, why I talk about CBT and ACT a lot here is because one, it's the evidence base for depression and anxiety in terms of research. And two, especially with seasonal depression, where it is this season, it's seen as like, this is going to attend to it pretty quickly. Narrative therapy is really, really helpful for anxiety and depression, but specifically with trauma as well. And so the idea of that piece, that can very easily have integration of Catholicism or spirituality in general, of this sense of, that's part of the story. That's part of your story. And so having that be understood as like, if you go into mental health treatment, how you present or how you want Catholicism to be understood, if you're wanting it to be understood as like, this is a part of me, this is a part of my life, hopefully that is being respected and understood.
I think in my case it definitely has, so thank you.
Good. Yeah.
I would say on that note, like if you have a therapist that's not respecting your Catholic religion, you should find a new therapist.
Yeah.
If you want to be your professional, find one that fits for you.
Yeah, if there's one who, as much as we would love psychology and psychotherapy to be this objective, we can figure it out no matter what, it still has that human piece to it, which means your therapist is going to bring their own perspective into it, and that might be contrary. Maybe they had their own issue with the Catholic Church or their own history with the Catholic Church, and that might influence how they interact with you. So I personally, when I meet with people, I very, very at the forefront say, I might not be a good fit for you, and that's okay. I want us to make sure of that right away, and if we're not, I'm going to give you referrals of what might be a better fit, because I don't take it personally that I might not be a good fit, because I know there's this personal aspect to this too. Yeah.
So you mentioned you did like some counseling and things like that. To what extent does spiritual warfare play a role in that? Like you have the obvious illustration of the devil on the shoulder, like like you're bad or whatever. Right? But when you mentioned you tell yourself these things, or like I guess how much do you say this is coming from not a spiritually healthy spot? Like how do you kind of fit that in?
Yeah. So I definitely believe the fact of spiritual warfare. I tend to, because I'm not a theologian, because I'm not a priest, because I'm not a spiritual director, I tend to not give that labeling to people, but I do point out the fact of if this isn't good for you, if this is saying you need to be severely punished for this, or you need to constantly be upset with yourself and never think highly of yourself, that's where I might start challenging it and be like, okay, is this actually accurate? Where can we build up some more compassion to? Where do we build up this sense that you are a child of God and therefore deserve love and respect and things like that, even from yourself? That piece of it I tend to be able to kind of focus on a little bit more, recognizing that our thoughts are going to be influenced by so many different things. Our experiences, the messages we get influenced by our past, by messages we received, by messages in passing, by even a message that we felt worked once and might not be working anymore, but our brain tends to be sometimes lazy, and it's well, it worked once, so I'm going to just keep hammering that nail and see if it works again, kind of thing. So that check-in of how do we build up more flexibility with it too? Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. It's really great and a great reminder. What would you say about with getting diagnosed with mental health disorders, not getting trapped in the identity of it, and integration of the faith as well as our cooler identity, which we probably also is being aware, accepting this might be something that you have. Consumed.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of I would say, variations of how people really take that. There's some people who they really feel validation with this sense of I am depressed, versus other people are I don't want to be just depressed. And so this idea of I have depression. And in my experience, the I think tends to give a little bit more even cognitive diffusion of this is a part of who I am, but it's not the whole of who I am. And now there's specific mental disorders that do impact a lot of who people are. And even within that, there's still this wide variety of what that can look like person to person. And so this recognition of I have this, I think, gets into this idea of embracing of, okay, so what does this mean? If I do have this, what does this mean about myself that I need to embrace, take awareness of, recognize, not put the onus on other people to always have to manage? I can talk about it to other people and have them recognize some pieces of it, but also knowing the responsibility piece of it also falls on me, of how do I manage this well? How do I address this in a way that's going to be helpful for me, as well as making it so that I can connect well with others too. But it's a tricky kind of thing to say, because especially if, for example, people who have gotten diagnosed later in life with something that feels oh, finally it makes sense, it can feel like a big identity piece for a while. But I still want to stress that, how you recognize other pieces of who you are and what that means too. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
There seems to be more recognition about the cycles that we tend to go. And you mentioned at one point that there may be evidence of an annual cycle that our bodies go through.
Yeah.
Does that mean if we were to go and visit a different latitude, like a warmer thing, it actually may not be beneficial for this, because it would actually be negative and it would throw off our annual cycle? And I'm curious what the research says about going to a sunnier place during the winter.
Yeah.
Is it positive or negative for these things? And so I'm curious about that. And I'm also wondering if there's what the latest research is about foods, because for a while I was hearing about vitamin D is linked to these things, and that we should eat vitamin D and different things like that. Who's the evidence that is helpful for preventative healthcare?
Yeah. So to your first question, the idea of if there's research with if you go to a place that has more sun, there hasn't been a ton of research. However, in general, that would be seen as that's light therapy. So yeah, good job. And it's not going to throw it off too much, as in it's going to help reset that circadian rhythm. It's going to help kind of modulate that a little bit more. And so that's seen as it would kind of make it not feel as drastic. I think part of why they don't research as much is because there's this idea of if we all had the means to from January to March, go somewhere else where it's sunny, that would be great, but that's not many people's realities. And so it's a lot of what can you do in the circumstances that you have, the resources that you have in the here and now. Yeah. But and the thing is, we live in a very northern state that has a lot of overcast during the winter, but not everybody in Washington has seasonal depression. And so that gets into that idea of the vulnerability piece too. And so this idea of oh yeah, just don't live there, doesn't necessarily mean that if you live there, you're going to have these experiences. Does that make sense? So that was your first question. Your second question was food. So food-wise, there was a lot of push the idea of vitamin D, because the idea of like sunlight gives you vitamin D, therefore if you ingest vitamin D, maybe that'll offset it. That hasn't been shown to actually offset the serotonin melatonin difference, because it's not actually a change in your vitamin D deficiency that's affecting those two, it's literally the light, right? And so there hasn't been a lot of good evidence that says taking in more vitamin D supplements is going to help offset that, because it's more about how your circadian rhythm is being affected. However, nutrition in general, there is a connection with gut health and mental health. And so the idea of like you're wanting more carbs and things like that is still recognizing, how do I regulate, how do I recognize I can have carbs, but I can have protein, and I can make sure that I don't eat so much before bed so it disrupts my sleep even more. It's all of these things that are interconnected kind of thing. Does that make sense? But there hasn't really been shown of, okay, during this time, if you just stick to this diet, you will avoid this. Yeah. Yeah.
I had really think about food from earlier, because I had noticed the carb thing to myself when I was in cardiologist. Before. But I don't know a whole lot about cravings, diet, that kind of thing. Are you craving it because you actually need it and eating carbs will help, or do you just have to say, nah? Like as a treat, but like I'm not gonna like carbo load for 3 months a year. So I'm curious, like, does your body crave it because it needs it, or do I just need to be like?
So, from the research, it's not necessarily that you need it.
Okay.
It's saying that you need it in the way if you're sleeping more. If you're like, it's to thinking back to like the hibernating bear kind of like, if you're going to be sleeping and not going to be gathering food as much or eating as many meals, you're going to need more carbs to offset that. And so it's more of you're craving it because of the change in melatonin and serotonin. And it's not necessarily that it's going to then make the serotonin go up and the melatonin go down. It's more of trying to respond to those things first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just curious. Would carbs help? Or
Yeah. I mean, carbs always help, but.
Is it actually constructive?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's all the time we
Yeah.
have, so thank you very much.